For many of us, our quarterly reset has become a time to pause, a time to create space for God to re examine our lives. Sometimes it's a time to regroup from all the craziness and pressures of our everyday life. It's also a time of reflection and a time of nurturing our souls. A reset in every sense of the word. Our theme is still generous God. Last night, as Pastor Renz mentioned, we looked at the false narrative of earning God's favor and how it is deeply embedded in our culture and even in our faith. We concluded that the bigger story of the Bible, or the bigger picture, contrary to what the culture and the world teaches us, is a story of God's steadfast love, culminating in the incarnation, Jesus' birth, his death, and his resurrection. The major narrative of the Bible is grace, undeserved, and unearned love. Today, or tonight rather, we will look upon how Jesus reveals God to us, his story, his narratives of God. The question we left last night was, what is God like? What does Jesus reveal to us about God? Is he like what our culture teaches us? A vindictive God, a God who needs to be appeased, or whose favor we need to earn? Now I'm going to ask you to do something very difficult. I would give you some time to let go of everything you think you know about God. I know this is a bit impossible, but we can try to imagine that you know nothing about God. You're about to hear Jesus tell a story about God and how he relates to us. Simply listen and engage in his word without any preconceived notions. Read with me tonight Matthew 20, verse 1 to 15, or most commonly known as the parable of the laborers in the vineyard. Let's read this. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. He agreed to pay them a denarius for the day and sent them into his vineyard. About 9 in the morning, he went out and saw others standing in the marketplace doing nothing. He told them, "You also go and work in my vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right." So they went. He went out again about noon and about 3 in the afternoon and did the same. About 5 in the afternoon, he went out and found still others standing around. He asked them, "Why have you been standing here all day long, doing nothing?" "Because no one has hired us," they answered. He said to them, "You also go and work in my vineyard." When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired and going on to the first." The workers who were hired about 5 in the afternoon came and each received a denarius. So when those who came who were hired first, they expected to receive more. But each one of them also received a denarius. When they received it, they began to grumble against the landowner. "This who were hired last worked only 1 hour," they said, "and you have made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the work and the heat of the day." But he answered one of them, "I am not being unfair to you, friend. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give the one who was hired last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my money? Or are you envious because I am generous?" Jesus ends with this question. Are you envious because I am generous? This is a story Jesus' hearers were more or less familiar with. There were a lot of unemployment. There was no work in Jesus' day. Perhaps as many as around 18,000 men were looking for work around Jerusalem. And each day, they would go to the fields looking for work. If they failed to be hired that day, they would go to the market and chatted with one another, hoping to still get a chance to work. In the parable of the vineyard owner, or the laborers of the vineyard, the owner hires a group of men. So first one was early in the morning, 6 a.m. These workers agreed to work for a standard day's wage or a minimum wage. Seeing there's much work to be done and not enough time to do it, the owner again looks for laborers at around 9 a.m. He does the same at noontime, at 12, and at 3 p.m., and lastly at around 5 p.m. At the end of the day, the owner pays the workers. Some have worked 12 to 13 hours or the whole day, and the other group only labored for about 1 or 2 hours. So they were hired 5 na. So tapos sila by 6. So 1 hour lang yung sa last group. But here comes the shocking part. They are all paid the same amount of money. A standard day's wage, a minimum wage. When I first read this, it's very shocking and stunning. It seems highly unfair. So those who work all day began to complain. Sabi nila, nagtrabaho kami, sobrang napagod kami all day. Tiniis namin ang init ng araw and we get the same. But the owner replies, "Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for the usual wage?" The owner concludes with a cutting question. Are you envious because I am generous? Bible scholar Joachim Jeremias notes that there is a similar parable told by Jewish rabbi. There was a version that the Jewish priest or the rabbi of Jesus' day told to the people also. But their story, their version has the same ingredient. Laborers hired at 6 a.m., 9 a.m., 12 noon, 3 p.m. and 5 p.m. But there's a catch. It has a different punchline. The punchline for the Jewish rabbis were he explained to all the groups that the last group, the owner of the vineyard explains that the last group got the same amount because they earned it. They were efficient, they were hardworking, they worked harder and did more in their short time than those from the other group, those who worked 12 hours, 9 hours, 6 hours, 3 hours. But Jesus' story is exactly opposite. It has nothing to do with earning justice or fairness. Joachim Jeremias continues. He says, in the parable of Jesus, the laborers who were engaged last show nothing to warrant a claim to a full day's wages. Wala naman talaga silang habol to a full day's wages. They received it entirely due to the goodness of their employer. And he continues, thus in this apparently trivial detail lies the difference between two worlds, the world of merit and the world of grace, the law contrasted with the gospel. Will you then murmur against God's goodness? That is the core of Jesus' vindication of the gospel. Look what God is like, all goodness. Let me ask you, if this were the only story you knew about God, what would you conclude? I personally would believe that God does not behave anything like what I see in the world. In our world, mas nagme-make sense yung Jewish rabbis version. Kasi ginawa ko ang lahat, mas nagtrabaho ako ng 1 hour compared to those who work 12 hours. But in Jesus' parable, we are struck with God's gratuity. The late workers did not deserve a day's wage. The God Jesus reveals runs counter to what we are wired to think. One of my favorite author puts it this way. He says, Jesus reveals a God who does not demand, but who gives, who does not oppress, but who raises up, who does not wound, but heals, who does not condemn, but forgives. We live in a world where people demand, oppress, wound and condemn. In our world, we have to earn, we have to perform much to get what we want. So we project that onto God. We think that God is like that. And it is easy to conceive of a demanding, oppressive, condemning, wounding God that must be appeased. But the God that Jesus reveals to us is utterly generous. What is God like? He is generous. Generosity happens when a person is living from a condition of abundance or when a person is moved by the needs of others. Example, if I have one sack of rice, it is easy for me to give 1 kilo of rice to others because I have a surplus. Sabi nga ng Webster Dictionary, generous is defined as free in giving or sharing, abundant, ample, bountiful. But I can also be generous even when I have a little. Siguro kung may 1 kilo of rice ako, and if I see a poor person, I can also share that 1 kilo of rice. I may be very moved to share that out of compassion. So we can see that generosity then flows from either a sense of abundance, pag marami tayong nai-share, or a feeling of compassion. But God is moved by both. God is generous because He lives in a condition of abundance. His provision can never be exhausted. And God is moved with compassion because He sees our need. And so, contrary to what we learned from the first night, love and forgiveness, acceptance and kindness are not commodities na parang mga bilihin na nababawasan when we give it. Rather, when we offer forgiveness, when we offer love, compassion, and kindness, we do not have less of it, nor do we diminish in our capacity to forgive. Hindi nababawasan yung our capacity to forgive when we forgive and when we give each time. So why do we seldom live generously? Bakit minsan nagdadamot tayo? Sometimes we live in a condition of scarcity. It is because sometimes we think that when we give or when we share, baka tayo naman ang magkulang. Or when we are generous, maybe people would abuse us. Or that people don't deserve to be helped. Ako nga, sabihin natin sa sarili natin, I worked hard for what I have right now. That is living in scarcity. I remember just a few days ago, sinundo ko yung ate ko from the airport. Tapos when we went through around Taft Avenue, may mga bata na naglilinis ng windshield. They just come during standstill, then they clean your windshield. Ano lang sabon. So I was waving, wag. Sabihan ko, no. Hanggang sa natapos niya. And it was time to go na. So sabi ko, wala akong mabibigay. I'll go. So nagalit yung bata. Pinalo niya yung sasakyan ko. And hindi naman siya na-scratch, but he became angry. And I was a bit angry also. Sabi ko, ano ba yun? Ginasgasan pa sa sasakyan ko. But then I realized, bakit pa hindi na lang ako nagbigay? I was amazed at how tight-fisted and uncharitable I was towards that kid. Sabi ko, bakit di na lang ako nabigay? It would not hurt if I gave a little. Our God, however, is constantly generous. Everything we have is a gift. And we were made with no effort in our part. Mihinga tayo, we breathe undeserved air. The sun rises and sets to warm our planet, along with rain, nourishing the plants so that we can have food to eat. There will never come a time where we can say to God, "You owe me. I deserve this." We do not deserve anything we have been given. We have earned nothing, yet God continues to give. That is because God is interested in what we can do for, not in what we can do for Him, but He is interested in something much more important than our good works. And tomorrow, we will be discussing that. Tonight, Jesus revealed to us what God is like. I encourage you as we pray, let us remember that we have a generous God who freely gives to us, whose love and grace we do not need to earn, a God who is generous because He lives in abundance and feels compassion because He sees our needs. Good evening and God bless us all.